Today, we have got a really good show for you. I'm very excited to announce that we are having Prab Sekhon, the CEO of Eclipse Energy, on.
We're trying to figure out how to produce hydrogen at 50 cents per kilogram while also keeping the carbon intensity below that 0.45 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen.
Yeah, they use microbes to put down old oil wells, and they can generate hydrogen out the other end. Using the existing infrastructure, they put in microbes, and out the other end comes hydrogen.
The problem is it's very expensive. In fact, it's 10 times more expensive than the price that we're trying to achieve, if not more.
They can do it for way cheaper than other firms have tried to produce green hydrogen.
We're injecting our biotech through the existing infrastructure, producing the hydrogen through existing infrastructure. Working in the industry for over 15 years, 17 years, some of the smartest people I've worked with have been those in oil and gas, right? They're making multi-billion-dollar decisions off of their P10, P50, P90 expectation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Clean Techies podcast. I'm Silas Maynor, your favorite clean tech headhunter. All right, today we have got a really good show for you. I'm very excited to announce that we are having Prab Sekhon, the CEO of Eclipse Energy, on. If you're not familiar with Eclipse Energy, a quick understanding of what they do. They use microbes to put down old oil wells that are just sitting there useless and actually costing oil companies money. And they can generate hydrogen out the other end. Using the existing infrastructure, they put in microbes, and out the other end comes hydrogen, which is then purified and then either sold on site to data center builders or whatnot. There's a lot of different applications for it, but they are able to do this for, I won't say exactly how much, but they can do it for way cheaper than other firms have tried to produce green hydrogen. So they're the only green hydrogen company to get costs so low that they can actually make sense even without subsidies, which is a very important topic right now. So the reason I'm very excited to have them on is, if you're not familiar with Eclipse Energy, they used to be called Gold H2. They recently rebranded for various reasons. But if you're familiar with Gold H2 was actually originally developed as part of Semvita. And Semvita, if you don't know, is one of my favorite companies. They created what they have now with Semvita. They created Gold H2 and Endolith. All of those three companies are now separate and independent companies. But we finally got Prab on to talk about what Eclipse Energy is doing. We needed to wait for the rebrand for this to happen. So that's why this took so long to do. It's now been, I think, about a year, and we've gotten all three of those incredible CEOs and founders on the podcast. So in today's episode, the core things we cover, aside from their technology and how it works, he kind of gives us every angle of hydrogen, so we understand what the specific issues are and why it hasn't taken off, etc. We talked about how they require minimal capex to set up what they're doing. They covered how their feedstock is free because it's just this old, oil that can't be extracted. And they also are able to keep their OPEX extremely low. So these are the core reasons why they're able to get the cost of their hydrogen so low. And we also gave an update on the macro trends in the hydrogen space globally, in the US, in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Europe. So he talked a little bit about what's going on there. I think it's a really good update for anybody who's not super plugged into the hydrogen space. And then we talked a little bit about the role of working with oil and gas and how the clean tech space should really learn to focus on different aspects of what we're doing and why what we're doing is exciting in order to fully take over the market and to stop having these haters and kind of this infighting that happens a lot in the clean tech space, and just generally speaking, the politicization of the issue. A lot of other things that we do talk about. Obviously, you're going to have to listen to get the rest of those. No more sneak peeks. But before we start, a quick shout out to the sponsors who made this show possible. First, we've got Climate Finance Solutions. You've heard them on the show several times, probably by now. Joel is incredible. Your first call, he should be your first call whenever you're looking to apply for grant funding. They have helped clean tech startups raise over $1.6 billion since 2020, and they have a 90% success rate at winning the funds they apply for. So reach out to them. And secondly, my company, EarthSearch. We are a full service clean tech startups build and implement differentiated talent attraction systems that give you an unfair advantage over your competitors. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful, but basically come to us. We'll help you make your recruitment process so much better that's going to blow your competitors out of the water. Reach out to learn how we do that. And finally, do not forget to register for the upcoming Hack Summit at New Lab in New York City. That's also a mouthful. December 10th and 11th, there will be over 500 founders, investors, and different ecosystem supporters at New Lab in New York for the climate deep tech industry specifically. And several of our past guests will be there. In fact, Liz Dennett, who's one of our favorites and one of the trifecta of the Semvita crew, will be there. One of my favorites actually in the whole clean tech space. So she's awesome. Got a lot of other past guests as well. So we are going to be there creating content for the event. The link to register is in the description below. I highly recommend you come if you have the time. If you're going to be in New York, definitely register to be a new lab for the Hack Summit. All right, without any further delay, let's get into this incredible episode with Prab. Thank you. All right, welcome to the podcast, Prab. How are you doing today?
Very good, my man. Great to see you through the camera.
Yeah, exactly.
Again.
It's been a while since I was able to come down and visit. I really appreciate you showing us the facility. It's actually pretty rare that I've had somebody on the podcast after I've been able to see their facility. Usually it's the other way around. I become friends through the pod and then we get to go see what's up. But we got to visit you when we were in Houston. That was in February, I think, right?
It's been a while. Yeah, there's been a lot that's gone on since you visited, but excited to talk about it today. It was great hosting you both.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. So give us, I guess, for anybody who's not familiar, give us a bit of a background on who you are, what you're doing today.
Yeah, so let me talk about the company first. So we are now Eclipse Energy. As of a couple of weeks ago, we were initially Gold H2. The focus really was taking end-of-life oil fields and turning them into clean energy assets. There's been a lot of work that we've done over the last year and a half. The rebrand is part of a larger strategy to go beyond hydrogen. We're going to be looking at multiple additional technologies and additional sort of low carbon fuels that we'll be utilizing the subsurface, deep microbiology, geoscience, and engineering to not only extend the life of these assets, but also think about using the subsurface as and climate asset in this energy transition, right? So that's us in a nutshell. We're a team of about 15 people based out of Houston, Texas. We're looking at projects around the world. Very, very interesting team that has both sort of a depth and breadth of experience. We've got folks that from Berkeley, from some of the top universities all over the United States and the world, actually. And we're trying to figure out how to produce hydrogen at 50 cents per kilogram while also keeping the carbon intensity below, that 0.45 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. So, yeah.
Well, why is that number 50 cents? Why is that important? Other than if you like rap.
Yeah. I think it's very important for a number of reasons. I think the first thing that we're trying to convey, I think, to our clients, to the world is you don't have to give up a low cost for low carbon intensity, right? We can achieve sort of this 50 cents per kilogram just to sort of set the table. I'm going to give you generalities of costs of different types of hydrogen. Green hydrogen has been talked about for a long, long time. I think the idea of green hydrogen, you're using electrolysis, so you're using power as an input, water, you're splitting the water into hydrogen and oxygen. Now, sounds great. It's an awesome idea, and I think there are going to be a lot of applications for it. The problem is it's very expensive. In fact, it's 10 times more expensive than the price that we're trying to achieve, if not more. Not only is it expensive, but I think one of the items that doesn't often get talked about is the fact that the feedstock is water, right? Potable water. And so when we start thinking about that, you're competing against agriculture, potable water for human consumption. So you're creating sort of a competition in that sense, and you're using a valuable resource to produce hydrogen or produce energy. What we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure we're not using any sort of potable water stream. We're trying to use a waste stream to produce this clean hydrogen. That waste stream is uneconomic oil that remains in the reservoir after it's produced its economic life. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I guess I never thought about this before until you just mentioned it. Like this idea that some companies, especially in the innovation space, whether it's green technology or not, they're basically competing with somebody else that if you end up using their source, you're taking something away from them because there is sort of a zero-sum game going on. But if you can find areas where there's a waste product or something that's just completely not being used or it's very difficult to use and you can use it, then you've got a very nice set of incentives and nobody's going to be coming for you being upset that you're taking, that you're taking their water in this case.
Yeah. I mean, so just speaking of incentives, I think I kind of want to break down a little bit of this concept of the hydrogen rainbow. I think I've said this in a few podcasts, a few panels, that I hate the idea of this qualification of hydrogen, right? You've got the rainbow you got green hydrogen, you have white hydrogen, which is natural. I know we're getting away from it, but what we're essentially doing is we're qualifying something that really needs to be quantified, right? And what I mean by quantification, there's really three major things we need to look at when we're producing hydrogen. And one is cost, right? Like, is it going to be cost effective for us to use that hydrogen to replace, let's say, incumbent energy streams or augment them? Two is, what's the carbon intensity? Is it an advantage for us to be using hydrogen over, let's say, natural gas, which is a relatively clean energy source if you compare it to coal and maybe some of the other streams? And three is the water consumption, as we talked about, right? And so that's really kind of where we started thinking about how do we achieve a low cost, a low carbon intensity, and not use potable water, right? That's where we started thinking about how can we find a free feedstock, if you will, right? That's a waste, or essentially a waste, which is uneconomic oil. How can you get the cost down low enough? That's by making sure you don't have to spend this immense amount of CapEx that you would for an electrolyzer, maybe some other technologies. We're using existing infrastructure, which are old sort of end-of-life oil fields. And then the third thing was OpEx. How do you keep the OpEx low? And that's really by utilizing this extremely inexpensive microbiology or biotech that we're developing here to use sort of this natural process and the Earth's heat to break down the remaining hydrocarbon and produce hydrogen out of it. Mm-hmm. So what's been very interesting, that was sort of the first thing we did. What we accidentally did is we figured out a way for oil companies to start deferring this massive P&A liability they carry, right? So just for folks who don't know what P&A is, it's plug and abandon. So once the oil field reaches end of life, oil companies have to plug and abandon them. And that's to ensure that you reclaim the land, ensure that there aren't any methane, let's say, leaks, or any kind of hydrocarbon that comes to surface. You're trying to get it back to its sort of natural habitat, the field back to its natural habitat after you've exploited the resource. That's an immense cost for oil companies. So what we're trying to provide a pathway for is, hey, we're giving you an economic case to retrofit your assets, make them hydrogen ready, ensure they're not leaking, and get another 20 years out of them. So not only are you deferring that cost, but you're also able to produce a clean energy source from something that is uneconomic and, has a higher carbon intensity. So we're kind of providing a true energy transition opportunity for a lot of these oil and gas companies. And, these liabilities for some of these fields they're not immaterial. These are hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of liabilities that a lot of these oil companies have on their books. So, that was like an accidental sort of thing that we started to realize, or the value we started to realize we're adding. So, yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Climate Finance Solutions, the firm helping climate tech companies win the major government grants that drive their scale and impact. Since 2020, they've won over $1.6 billion in public funding for their clients, with a 90% success rate on the dollars that they've applied for. Their team has also helped win more than 500 million euros in European funding and managed over $275 million in grant projects. With a global team of 27 experts, CFS supports climate innovators through every stage of the funding lifecycle, from strategy to proposals to project execution. They also have a grant identification platform that enables real-time monitoring and custom matching of opportunities with alerts as new grants are released. If you're a climate investor, accelerator, or ecosystem builder, you can even join their partnership program to unlock pro bono support for your portfolio companies. Learn more at climatefinancesolutions.com. All right, back to the show. So I'm curious, we should probably go to the technology. I'll have to run backwards to a few of these points you mentioned here, but
for sure.
Can you just explain the very basics of the actual technology, how it works, so anybody who's not, a chemist or a microbiologist can understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of double click into not only the technology, but the environment that we're sort of producing this hydrogen from, right? So first things first, you have oil fields, right? They've been producing oil for decades. You're lucky if you can produce 50% of the oil in place economically. In some cases, when you look at unconventional assets, you're lucky if you get 15% of the oil in place. So there's this tremendous amount of oil left behind. And oil companies are always thinking about, how do I increase that recovery factor? How do I get more out of this reservoir? So that's kind of the environment we're looking at. These fields have been produced sort of for decades. So we have a really good understanding of the reservoir, the characterization, what that essentially tank looks like, right? What we're doing is, I want you to kind of think about our gut biome, right? There's this whole prebiotic, probiotic routines that people are using, and it's actually enhancing their life. So what that probiotic and prebiotic are doing, they're essentially getting the bugs right in your stomach to ensure that you're not gassy, you have high energy, your nutrient absorption is optimal, etc. Well, we're trying to do the same thing, right? Every one of these reservoirs has a microbiome. And what we're trying to do is perturb that microbiome so that instead of staying in the state of homeostasis, we are using microbes to produce hydrogen, to eat the oil and produce hydrogen. And with continuous injection, we can achieve, we think, up to 250,000 kilograms a day of hydrogen consistently, depending on the field, of course. But that's kind of how the technology works. The other piece is, we have wells that are in the ground. So we're injecting our biotech through the existing infrastructure and producing the hydrogen through existing infrastructure. So you have a tremendous amount of CapEx saving that goes into this. You'll obviously retrofit some of the equipment to make it hydrogen ready and purify on the surface, but that's a magnitude different.
Yeah, compared to drilling a new well.
Compared to drilling a new well, compared to putting up an electrolyzer or anything in between.
Yeah. So, and then just to understand this, like, what does it mean to inject the microbes? Like, what is the cost of this? Is this like super minimal cost? You can just inject and then you're getting a high value product out the other side?
That's exactly it. Microbes are cheap. We can ferment them on the ground. We can ferment them in the reservoir. So this biotech package is an extremely cheap sort of, it's actually less than half of the levelized cost of hydrogen, right? Most of the cost goes into purification of that hydrogen on the surface. So of that 50 cents, let's say, 15 cents or so is the actual biotechnology that's going into the ground. The rest of it is made up with the CapEx required for getting the field ready and purification, the hydrogen on the surface to get it to, let's say, 5 nines hydrogen, right? Or that's 99.99% hydrogen.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's really helpful. So in general, just to recap people, you inject microbes into existing oil wells that are a liability for the oil companies who own them, because they will have to plug them, and that's an expense. But this makes it an actual asset producing, a financial return kind of producing asset again. And it's just very simple. The microbes go in and you capture it on the outside and then refine the hydrogen there. And then after that, you'll then ship it off to where it's going to be used, or will it typically be used on site?
Yeah, so it really depends on the asset, right? Like we're looking at projects around the world right now. One of the assets we're looking at is in California. We have hydrogen off-takers nearby, whether that would be for sort of hydrogen fueling stations or decarbonization. There are other areas where we're looking at potentially co-locating ammonia plants, right? If there's for either fertilizer or ammonia is used for power now, right? It's a clean sort of NH3, clean fuel. But I think the most interesting sort of partnership, we announced this a few weeks back. It is our partnership with Armada, right? Armada, they are constructing these essentially climate-proof, bulletproof modules that can host data centers. They're build out data centers. I think they just signed a deal with OpenAI. But the idea here is we would be able to co-locate these data centers in the field and burn the hydrogen to power them. So you've got a low carbon intensity sort of product that's powering these data centers. Also, it's all behind the meter, so you don't require sort of grid power,
which is the biggest issue.
Which is a big issue, right? And in an oil and gas field, you have natural gas, so you have backup power source if you need. We have another partnership. I can't say their name, but it's with one of the largest turbine manufacturers in the world. They have a dual fuel turbine. So we'd place that turbine in the field that can take either hydrogen or natural gas and power these data centers. One of the things that we're really thinking through with some of our partners, when you burn hydrogen, you produce water, right? And data centers need water for cooling. So as you sort of go through your cooling stages with that steam, you also have built-in cooling right there for your data centers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
the clean tech startups need to hire the right talent to hit their milestones, especially in the early days. Without the right team, you'll never make it to your Series A round. And after years of observing this struggle that pre-seed and seed stage clean tech startups have to get the right talent, I decided to create Earth Tech Talent. Our mission is to help clean tech companies hire the best talent so they can succeed and make the world greener. So whether you need some advice on how to craft your talent acquisition strategy, you need to increase your number or quality of applicants, or you need help screening the candidates to save you some time, or you just need traditional headhunting services, reach out today. We have priced everything so that even a pre-seed startup can afford it. Fundamentally, you're only building on clean tech startups because you care about humans. Your hiring process should reflect that. Work with us to craft a hiring process that is human-centered. Doing this will lead to all those job applicants becoming your biggest champions in the public. And even if they get rejected, we make it so that they will still have a positive experience and they'll want to apply again in the future, and they'll be your biggest advocates. To get in touch, reach out to me on LinkedIn or go to earthtechtalent.com/contact. That's techtalent.com/contact. All right, back to the show. There's a confluence of things that can come together that make it really interesting. So
absolutely,
that's really helpful. I did want to back up to, there's this, for a long time, people have been talking about, we're going to have hydrogen cars, we're going to have all these things. If I understand correctly, and I'd like to get your take on this, that part of the reason why we don't have that future where everything is hydrogen powered instead of just electric powered is that we just couldn't produce hydrogen for cheap enough to make it make sense. Is that an accurate assumption in your mind?
That's exactly it. Like if you go to California and you look at the cost of hydrogen at the pump, it's actually lower than what they're paying for that hydrogen. There's just incentives built in, right? Like you're paying something like, I want to say $25 per kilogram. And I just kind of want to put this price in perspective for folks, right? Like another thing that really irks me is that we talk about hydrogen and $1 per kilogram sort of unit, because it really doesn't mean anything when you're comparing it with, let's say, natural gas, right? So the metric I like to use, 50-cent hydrogen is about $4.40 per MMBTU equivalent, right, from a heating perspective. And $1 is about $8.81 per MMBTU. So think about from, if you're comparing it to natural gas, we're at like $3 or so, plus or minus per MMBTU. Now, if you're paying $20 at the pump, I'm not comparing diesel here. I should be. I'm not comparing apples with apples, but you can see how much higher of a cost that is than what you'd pay for some of the incumbent fuels. So, that's another thing that I think we really need to start thinking hard about is how do we translate the cost of hydrogen to how people are using it? Dollars per MMBTU, dollars per megawatt hour, right? So I didn't mean to go in a rabbit hole there.
But you're saying, just to clarify, because part of this stuff you might have lost me here, is that the actual output, you're talking about the output of each, and you're comparing the cost of how much it takes to get to that output, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
That's exactly it.
That was my next question, was going to be around the cost. So if the costs haven't come low enough that we have this future where a lot of companies are, building hydrogen powered XYZ, what are the costs of hydrogen elsewhere? I mean, you mentioned the different spectrum of the rainbow of different hydrogen types. Yeah. What are the costs that we are aware of on that kind of spectrum?
Yeah, I think it varies, right? I think one of the colors you hear about is white or natural hydrogen, which has, I think, it has a lot of legs. It's just exploration. There's hydrogen accumulations in the earth. You're exploring for it. If you hit an accumulation and it's economic, you could get it as low as $1 per kilogram, which I think, you see companies like Coloma and other, you've got Gold Hydrogen out of Australia and a few other Hytera that are producing or exploring for hydrogen. The problem with that is it's going to take a little while before we get there, right? And it is an exploration play. I mean, it's just like oil and gas. You have to go and figure out, one, is there hydrogen there? Two, how much volume of hydrogen is there? Three, can you produce it at economic rates? And then four, how do you commercialize it, right? Can you get that volume to the off-taker, right?
But my assumption would be too that there's still some refinement happening with you when you find geologic hydrogen.
With us?
With white hydrogen.
With white. There would still be some refinement, but you're seeing some pretty pure hydrogen with maybe some helium in there. Yeah, so they're doing a really good job in that sense, I think. I think what kind of separates us is we don't have to go through that exploration phase, right?
Yeah.
We're targeting reservoirs that have been produced for decades. So we know what the reservoir looks like. The real risk for us is our technology going to be optimal in that specific reservoir over a 20-year period? And, you've seen our lab. We've got a world-class lab out here set up to try and interrogate these petroleum systems to understand how much hydrogen can we produce. And then we've got a really quick sort of pilot process that's usually anywhere from 12 months to 24 months, plus or minus 6 months, to understand, will you be able to get commercial volumes out of this? So that's kind of what we're targeting in California right now. We did our first of a kind Huff and Puff project in the San Joaquin Basin, and we saw significantly higher hydrogen concentration than we expected for that specific test.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be looking at doing sort of a 24-month continuous pilot out there with the idea of scaling up to about 150,000 kilograms a day project that supports that. So yeah, that kind of separates us a little bit from geological hydrogen. I think, we've got our own limitations. Our limitations is we go anywhere there's oil.
Yeah.
And we're kind of limited to that. Whereas,
but it's also known, right? So you mentioned the exploration side.
Yeah.
I don't know if these are going to be the same cost. I assume they're different to an extent, but we recently had Durin Mining on. They were talking about exploration of critical minerals, right? And that's like, I think he said $250 million typically to find a deposit. And then you usually, I think, if I remember correctly, get about $1 billion out of it if you're lucky for an outcome. So if it's anything close to that, that's I'm assuming a much bigger capex than you guys have to get things running, right?
Significantly larger. Yeah.
And the other thing that's fascinating is, like, you were just talking about, if I understand correctly, the cost of hydrogen now, like, that anybody can buy, even if it's not green hydrogen. What is the cheapest hydrogen that people can buy? What does that typically cost?
There's gray hydrogen, and that's where you're kind of going through steam methane reform and putting the CO2 into the air, right? That'll probably be $1 to $1.50 right now, right? But you got the problem. You have higher carbon intensity.
Yeah, exactly.
I think blue hydrogen, they're actually capturing the CO2 and they'll be injecting that into the reservoir. That's a little bit more expensive than gray hydrogen, right? But things like green hydrogen, they just don't hit sort of pricing, right?
This is the point I want to get to, is like, even what you guys are making is, you said 50 cents. That's going to be cheaper than even gray hydrogen, right? Like this. Yeah. Just no care to the carbon intensity. So I just find it really fascinating that you guys can get to this point. I don't know if it makes sense to go back. I am just a little bit curious. Like, can you talk anything about the exploration process to identify this technology? Like, how did this come about?
Yeah. So I think what was pretty clear from the very beginning. So I've got an oil and gas background. I had about a decade and a half in upstream oil and gas. And, I worked in various sort of fields. And microbes were always considered problems. Like, there's microbes, let's kill them, right? And that's initially, they would cause problems, H2S, slime, etc., right? But what's actually happened over the last couple of decades is there's been a lot more research done into sort of these microbial systems in the subsurface. And what we're starting to find is there are microbes that do things that we don't want them to do, and there are microbes that can do things that we do want them to do, right? And what's also been interesting is these microbes don't act individually. It's a syntropic system, so they act together. So when you're looking at these systems, you can't just try and pinpoint that I want to kill one or I want to proliferate another. You're thinking about, how do I evolve this system as a whole to make it do what I want it to do? So that was really the basis of what we've been building, or what kind of kicked it off, right? I think it was pretty clear early on that hydrogen was going to have legs. And so the thought was, how could we create a value add product from these microbes by using their natural processes? And that's really how we got kickstarted on developing the biotechnology in the lab and then deploying it in the field.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I appreciate that background there. Now, I am curious. We kind of skipped over it at the beginning, but how did you end up coming to get into this role at Eclipse?
Yeah, I was actually looking at it from an investment standpoint in my previous role. So I'll give a little bit of background on me. I spent about 10 years with Hess Corporation. I was working on projects around the world. Started kind of in North Dakota, where the Bakken was really taking off. So it was kind of my first foray into first of a kind technology, multi-stage fracturing, without really knowing what first of a kind meant, right? And I spent about 3.5, 4 years there. And what was interesting is because no one else was really doing it, you're 25 years old and you're almost like a subject matter expert in that specific field. And so it gave me an opportunity to start looking at projects around the world. So I was in a role where we were trying to think about how to deploy a multi-stage fracturing in our assets in France, in the Middle East, and other parts of the world. And NextEra at the time had really, jumped in with both feet into green hydrogen. It was this idea, how can we use this excess renewable power to get value out of it, right? And I think I kind of read the tea leaves, and I thought there were going to be some headwinds when it came to electrolyzers. So I started researching different ways that hydrogen could be produced. And that's where I came across, Eclipse, formerly Gold H2. And I was actually writing up an investment memo, and then the CEO position was open. And so it's kind of like a decision, hey, here's the investment memo. Here's my 2 weeks. I got to take this role. And that's kind of how I ended up over here. So that's kind of the story. It was just too fascinating and too interesting of an opportunity for me to give up. So I kind of left. It was a pretty cool role I was in, but I got to say, this is a little cooler.
I mean, it's also really fascinating. I think there's an underrated trajectory of going from investor to founder. I think there is, not to be confused with you guys, there's Eclipse Ventures, which does a really good job of this, that brings in a lot of people internally as a kind of an entrepreneur in residence, but they are an investor. And then a lot of times they stick around for 6 months and leave and go start something, right? And they're cruising. Actually, I've come across their companies a lot, actually recently on the podcast too. So
it's awesome.
But no, I do think that's an interesting trajectory, because a lot of times people are considered these people who want to go build these things as, maybe they're crazy and they just have this idea they got to chase. But in reality, it's like you came actually from the investment perspective and you realize that everything made sense and let's go make this happen. So no, I appreciate that. I would like to take a bit to talk about talent. So I'm very curious where you guys end up hiring most of your team from, given that you're in this kind of like, I would assume, a relatively underdeveloped space that this exists between the worlds of microbiology and oil and gas.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, we're in a niche, right? We're in this spot where, yes, we're talking about subsurface, but we're talking about petroleum microbiology and stuff that's really never been done before. We've been very intentional about our hiring. We've been hiring from within our network, and I think we've evolved from a team of, let's say, a year and a half ago, microbiologists, to a very diverse and integrated team. So some of the pieces that we've started to add are geoscience and reservoir engineering, because yes, there is a part of this problem that is a microbiological problem, but really it's an integrated problem, right? Because there's the idea of production of hydrogen, but then there's also the transportation and exploitation of hydrogen that is equally as important. So what we've been doing is really trying to pull in experienced folks, those who have backgrounds in oil and gas, those who have backgrounds in petroleum engineering and geoscience, and kind of combining them, right? And it's also very interesting because a lot of these petrotechs, if you will, have never thought about hydrogen being generated in the reservoir. And then a lot of these microbiologists haven't thought about hydrogen being transported or, anything beyond hydrogen production in a bottle. So kind of seeing that confluence has been a really, really interesting and I got to say rewarding experience for the team.
So do you find that people catch on really quickly to the things that they don't know because you have the other team members who can fill them in?
For sure. I think I've got a petroleum engineering background, so I can talk for myself, but it's flow through porous media, right? The difference is we used to chase these accumulations of hydrocarbon. Now what we're trying to do is exploit this generation of a product of a gas from point A and pulling it out at point B. So it's still all of the same principles, slightly different sort of processes and viscosities that you're dealing with. But, just to give you an example, we're doing work with some of our advisors at the University of Texas. We're doing kind of first of a kind reservoir simulation in situ hydrogen production. And all the processes and software is standard oil and gas software that we've been using for decades, right? We're just kind of augmenting the model slightly, but everything else remains the same. So, it's in the same way we're using these old liabilities, oil and gas, sort of end of life fields, and turning them into these new assets. We're using sort of this commercial technology that's been used for decades and thinking about how we can utilize it for our existing processes and technology. So it's been, people catch on pretty quick. I think, the teams, I'm the dumbest one in the room every time I enter one of those meetings. So they've all been able to catch on pretty quickly.
The best way for it to be. This is really good because it's very hard usually when you have such a true innovation, something really new, to find people who are capable of understanding, comprehending, and really moving forward in that space. I've only recruited out of oil and gas companies occasionally, so I'm curious to get this take as well. Do you find that the talent who comes from this space, who has an understanding of what they need to, and they can learn the rest, do they have the appetite for startups typically, or is it really like, hey, we have to really kind of, put the elbow grease on and convince them that this is worth taking the risk?
Yeah, so I think we've been very lucky. We haven't had any problems filling any roles that we've been looking at. In fact, we have tons of unsolicited applications that come from some very experienced folks. I think the reality right now in oil and gas is, oil and gas ebbs and flows. It's kind of a downtime right now. So there's a lot of talent available. And I got to say, working in the industry for a year, for over 15 years, 17 years, some of the smartest people I've worked with have been those in oil and gas, right? Their ability to understand sort of these envelopes of uncertainty. You don't really, you see that in other industries, but they're making multi-billion-dollar decisions off of their P10, P50, P90 expectations, right? So being uncomfortable with making decisions with a ton of uncertainty is something that a very unique sort of skill set to bring into our company. Because look, I always compare ourselves to sort of gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen. The reality is, though, they're at a TRL level that's further ahead. It's a proven commercial technology. We're still developing our technology. So there is always going to be this envelope of uncertainty. So bringing that sort of skill set in is really helping us get our heads around kind of the known unknowns. There's always going to be the unknown unknowns, but they're really helping us figure out how do we think about production rates under this, in a probabilistic sort of way rather than just deterministic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite fascinating to hear. I think I was actually, as you were saying this, I was thinking about just like the history, I guess you could say, of oil and gas. From what I understand, like it kind of attracted what this term, like wildcatters, right? Like these people who are generally willing to take some risks. And I'm maybe you could compare it to say that those people were actually like the original Silicon Valley people, because they were willing to go out and pursue this. And in this case, it's not, we're not like going out and drilling for new wells. In this case, you're finding people who are willing to take a risk on, can we get this technology to work well, because we already have the rest, and they understand the concept. So that is interesting. When startups are in the earlier days, there's a lot of things to be done, right? Everybody, they talk about, hey, we got to wear multiple hats. But when it does come time to hire, how do you sort through understanding what is and is not required in a role, and whether or not you actually need to hire? And I ask this because I've seen a lot of early stage companies struggle with saying like, oh, we need to hire this, and then they kind of they try to fit 5 roles into one, or they take one thing that's only really important for one person to do, and they make it into 5 roles depending on how much money they've raised. So how do you sort through this and decide this is what we're going to hire for, and then get your team on board?
Yeah, I think the first thing, I got to give my board a big up here, because they've really helped me think through these, as well as my chief of staff. They've really helped me think through this idea of competency matrices, right? Matrices. You're trying to really figure out what is needed, what is sort of wanted, and what is nice to have. Those are the sort of, as far as skill sets go. And based on what your current team has, you can start to identify gaps, right? And sometimes themes emerge. So sometimes, let's say it's a gap of hydrocarbon degradation and geochemistry, right? Maybe that's one role that you could find someone for. In other cases, they're two very different roles. So we start thinking about, I'm always very conscious about cash burn. We pride ourselves on only spending what we need to spend and maintaining a really tight ship. But we start thinking about advisors, right? Like we've got some world-class advisors who are helping us both on the technical side as well as the commercial side. So how can we use our advisory to maybe help us fill some of those gaps, right? Whether it's them providing us 10 hours of guidance a month or actually coming in. And then we start thinking about, are these roles that need to be full-time, or are they roles that could be contractors? Are they roles that, aren't so specific to the IP? An example is like, if we're building an SOP for a specific field, do we need to bring an operations engineer online full-time, or can this be a consultant? These are, discussions we're constantly having. So it all really starts with, what do you have and what do you think you need? And can you justify specific roles based on those gaps? Or can you fill them with an advisor or a consultant / contractor, right?
What about hiring green versus experienced talent? Like, how do you sort this? Because a lot of startups like, oh, we don't want to pay a lot of money, so we'll just hire somebody more junior. Hopefully they can figure it out.
I think there are some roles where someone out of college is going to knock them out of the park. We've actually had a couple hires that have come out of college, and man, are they high performers. They're taking names and kicking ass, right? But there are some specific roles where I think experience is extremely important. That's something we've sort of learned the hard way over the last year and a half. There's been roles that are extremely critical that need someone who's been able to execute at a high level and has a demonstrated track record of it. You just can't afford to experiment. So, it really depends. I think there's definitely a lot of value to experience for specific roles, but then there are other roles where a new college graduate, you couldn't make a better decision, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you have a method of understanding when it is truly that you need somebody who's experienced versus when it's not? Like, is there any sort of matrix that you can think through in that?
Yeah, I mean, we're always going through detailed job descriptions, right? So we think about the matrix and we think about what are the tasks that these folks need to do. We've got a pretty robust RACI chart in-house that's constantly evolving, right? So from that RACI chart, you start to realize, like, what level of expertise do we need for this? Do we need an associate who can do some research for us, or do we need a head of BD who can really think about commercial contracts, has experience with deploying early stage technologies and commercializing them? So it all comes down to the job description, the matrices, and that the RACI chart and the competency matrices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think talent, obviously I work in the space, so I'm a little biased, but I think that talent is the most important thing to get these companies to move forward. If we really want to produce
for sure
a better future, like we need the right people. We can't just accept somebody because they're mission oriented, assume they're going to be able to get the job done, because unfortunately there's a lot of people who are mission oriented but just are not willing to put in the work, right? And I've seen this happen too many times. We have a lot of, probably in the next 12 months, I'm assuming there's going to be a number of some bad news, some continued bad news in the clean tech space with big companies that were, raised tons of money, just, falling out left and right. I obviously see some of this stuff before others do because of what I do.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be pretty all around. But I wanted to go back to, there's one question I think I missed when it comes to the hydrogen aspects, because you mentioned this topic a few times, transportation of hydrogen. Can you talk about the role of transportation and why that's important?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most important aspects after cost to getting hydrogen to, I don't want to say replace, but to become a bigger part of the decarbonization story. I mean, hydrogen molecules are very small, right? They're one of the smallest molecules that we'll have in the ground. So they escape very easily. And one of the problems you have with these small molecules is you have, with the existing pipeline infrastructure, at higher pressures and higher concentrations, you can start to have hydrogen embrittlement. So that essentially says your pipelines will fail. So I don't think it's too much of an issue at lower concentrations and lower pressures, but it's definitely something that I think midstream operators, regulatory bodies, et cetera, are thinking hard about. And I think transportation, not only is it expensive, but getting a molecule from, let's say, a producing asset to the off-taker, that's also very difficult. If you asked me a year and a half ago what kept me up at night, it would be, how do I move this hydrogen, right? I think one of the things for us that's really changed the game is this idea of data centers and co-location of data centers with the hydrogen producing assets. We've been very thoughtful in, the pilots that we're doing or the pilots that we're planning for is there an opportunity for commercial offtake nearby? Is there an economic opportunity for commercial offtake nearby? So in a roundabout way, what I'm trying to say is it will make or break a lot of projects. Transportation is something, and we don't have control over it, right? There's regulatory bodies, there's economics, and then there's the midstream companies who are making these decisions. So definitely something that is, I would say, is a headwind, is a hurdle, but we're trying to think of smart ways to get around that.
Yeah, that's helpful. It sounds like there's the importance of, if you can co-locate close to something else like the data center issue, that's great. And then obviously, if it gets to a point where everything's cheaper, I can assume the infrastructure would then get built out to make it a little bit more feasible, even without those things, right? And this is like the chicken and egg situation, correct?
You'd hope so, but at the same time, you have to compare sort of what the alternatives are, right? If it's for power, natural gas is going to be cheaper. Why would you build something out unless you're incentivized? I mean, one of the things we've seen in the US as of recent is this BBB bill, right? It's gutted a lot of the incentives to create hydrogen projects or to remove some of those economic hurdles. So, in the US, I think it's going to be a bit of a problem. There are other countries that are investing billions of dollars. Oman's a great example. You look at Oman, I think they're putting about $160 billion into their hydrogen infrastructure because they're serious about it. I think they've got a tremendous amount of natural hydrogen that they can exploit, and they want to be an ammonia/hydrogen exporter, one of the leaders in it. So, places like that are perfect for us because there's oil there. And if the country's investing into an infrastructure, it removes that hurdle altogether for us, right? Other areas, we might be turning that hydrogen into ammonia. Other areas will be electrifying. So we're trying to keep our options open as far as what we're going to do with that hydrogen and how we're going to get around this transportation issue, or, lean into the existing infrastructure that's there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, you talked about this a little bit now, but I am curious, like, what are the core, it sounds like you mentioned the US is not necessarily very heavily investing as a government into hydrogen right now. It sounds like some other countries are. Are there any other core macro trends that you'd want to bring up that is for anybody who's not familiar with the space?
I mean, core macro trends like decarbonization isn't as much of a priority as it was. As you're seeing with the talent that's coming across your desk, it isn't as much of a priority as it once was, right? I mean, you've even had, I think he backed off of him, Bill Gates mentioned that the climate crisis maybe wasn't as bad as initially thought, but these are discussions that are happening. I got to say, there's still a lot of interest in the Middle East, a lot of interest in Southeast Asia, Europe. There are regulations built around decarbonizing, so we lean a little bit on that. I think the big thing about our tech that we've been really focused on is we need to get to 50 cents per kilogram without any incentives, right? The whole idea is you should never try and make a business model that's based 100% on incentives. For us, that's cream, right? That's icing on the cake. But our core technology needs to stand without those incentives. And I think that's why we're a little bit different. I think we've also, because we're CapEx light, we're not so dependent on, let's say, grants per se to build a plant. And we're not held hostage to any of these hydrogen sort of hubs that have been developed, that are being developed around the U.S. And we've been I can give you an idea of the global sort of footprint we're looking at. So we've obviously had our first of a kind in California. We've got 2 pilots planned in West Texas here in the next month or two. We're sampling in North Dakota with hopefully a pilot after a winter breakup, if you will, when it gets a little warmer out there. 2 projects in South America we're looking at a couple projects in Europe, 1 project in the Middle East, Australia, and we're just kind of scratching the surface of Southeast Asia. So, I mean, for us, because it's so cheap I don't want to say cheap, inexpensive to really de-risk, it really opens up the whole world for us, right? Yeah. Without having to really spend $50 million to $100 million in one area to understand if it's going to be
because
economic.
It's not the same as like betting the farm on one pilot project that has to work, otherwise you can't advance, right? Because your equipment to test these things out is relatively minimal that you can go and, I mean, I think you just mentioned like almost a dozen projects or close to a dozen projects that you are like testing out. And I assume the reason you're doing this also is because there is a longer period that you want to test to make sure things are correct before you go and build it, because you said that there's that kind of testing phase before you build the full scale production.
That's exactly it. I mean, the first step is really understanding what are the reservoir parameters. Do they fit with our current technology stack? or will they fit with our technology stack in the next 1 to 2 years, right? The second piece is actually going and sampling those reservoirs and understanding what that microbiome and that petroleum system looks like, right? The petroleum looks like. The next step is bringing it into the lab and trying to figure out how to optimize hydrogen production. From there, we've got both our microbiology lab and our engineering lab. We're looking at static and dynamic scenarios. From there, we put together a pilot, which we deploy in the field. And based on that pilot, we have a pretty good idea of whether this is going to be an economic project or not. So very quick cadence, very cost effective. We're using existing wells, right? Yeah. So it's not like you have to spend millions of dollars to drill wells. We're using existing wells with relatively inexpensive sort of biotech to deploy it.
Yeah. No, I find it fascinating. We didn't talk about this yet, but I just really, really quickly, because I want to cover a couple other things before we run out of time. Is the model going to be that you guys are just a producer of hydrogen? You're going to sell the hydrogen, or are you going to get a project developer fee? Like, what's the actual financial model?
Yeah. So right now, I'll talk about the main model we have right now, and that's technology as a service. Okay. So these end-of-life fields are generally owned by operators. So what we would do is we'd go and provide the technology to the operator, right? The operator owns the resource, they own the hydrogen, we'd help them find an off-taker. And what we've been doing is we've sort of been developing this ecosystem of partners that will help all the way from deployment of the biotech in the field to purification to either power generation or offtake. So we've been building a really, robust sort of model with some major companies to help us achieve that. So, when we go to an operator, we say, look, here are your assets or your end of life, your P&A liabilities. What if we built another 20 years of value out of this for you? And this is how we're going to do it. So that's been our approach. The other option is licensing. So we've been approached by a few companies to license in different parts of the world where we probably wouldn't be able to operate on our own. I think that's the second piece. But I think as we start to mature the technology, the third piece really becomes using our technology as a competitive advantage and perhaps building opcos where we take over these fields and we turn them into hydrogen fields, and we're actually the hydrogen producer and we find an off-taker for it. So I think it's all contingent on, I shouldn't say contingent. These are all kind of stage gates, right?
Yeah.
As our technology begins or continues to mature, what type of commercial pathway we would take.
Yeah, because you can't license technology until you have certain warranties, they're called typically, right?
I mean, you can license anything you want, right?
Yeah, but usually people want, like, you have to be able to warranty for like whatever 10,000 hours or I don't know the numbers, but
exactly.
You have to be exactly. So, okay, fair play. I just want to make sure we touch on that. The other thing I think is kind of an elephant in the room that we have to talk about is I'm curious if people give you, we just talked about decarbonization not being necessarily as hot of a topic anymore, at least in the US, but do people give you a lot of crap for working with the oil and gas companies and helping them make more money?
I think they used to. Really, they used to. But when you really get to the brass tacks and talk about carbon intensity and cost of hydrogen, those conversations generally go away, right? I think electrolyzers, the costs are continuously going up. I mean, it was $5 a couple of years back. Now it's who knows what it is. But I think this idea of energy pragmatism is really sinking in. So we're seeing a lot more sort of, whether it's venture capitalists or partners thinking, you know what, there is a world, there is a transition where the oil and gas company should be a part of it. I mean, who knows how to develop large CapEx projects with uncertainty better than an oil and gas company? There really isn't another industry that can do that with the level of complexity of these projects. So, I think the narrative has definitely changed, and maybe that's a part of deprioritizing decarbonization for a lot of folks, or it's a realization that we need to be pragmatic in the way we approach the energy transition. So,
yeah, I think this is fair. I haven't necessarily put it this way before, but I think if we were to reverse, back, I don't know, probably 25 years with you have to go to Clean Tech 1.0. If you didn't call it clean technology, I think if you called it something else, I don't know if you wouldn't want to just call it technology, but if you just focused on it being better, it's literally a better thing. It's cheaper. People wouldn't have, I think, politicized it as much, and we'd be like seeing a lot more moving forward, because fundamentally when you call it a clean technology, you're referring to, you're juxtaposing it to dirty, and then you're also immediately forcing the person on the other side of the table to maintain the same assumption, a very large assumption as you do. And if they don't, then you're going to have some issues, even if the cost effectiveness is there. Like there's this kind of weird tension. Whereas if you just focus on making better technology that is cheaper, that, maybe safer, like there's all kinds of things that can go with it. And then there's the side benefits of no pollution, etc. Then you end up having a much better outcome, because right now, at least when I talk to a lot of people now who are not in the space, which most of the people, again, outside of my work, like I don't have clean tech people around here in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
They're all like, oh, what exactly is clean tech? And they just don't understand that it simply is better and cheaper technology that also, is not going to, hurt our lungs, for example. So I think it's an interesting perspective of how we could have redone this, but we have the opportunity now to just focus on that and continue pushing forward this better technology. So
Yeah.
we're any comments on that?
Yeah, I actually remember I was in a town hall. I think I was like 3 years in or 4 years into my career when I was at Hess, and I think it was John Hess was speaking at it. And one of the things, this was, I think, right before or after the election. And one of the I think it was right after the election. One of the takeaways was he said that our goal at Hess Corporation, one is to be the best performing energy asset, but also to be unaffected by political results, right? And so it was after the election because he showed sort of the stock price before and after and the impact. And so I think there's a little bit of a change, and his comment was, we want to get to a point where there's really no material change based on this. And I think that's kind of where you're going with this, Silas, is how do we depoliticize the energy transition? And I think that's one. I'm an oil and gas person. My history is oil and gas. I can't demonize oil and gas, right? But I can provide solutions on how to add value. And guess what? It also decarbonizes, right? Kind of like what you were saying. So yeah, that's my only comment on that piece.
I just think it's very challenging because when somebody believes something as a sort of like core tenet of their I don't know if to say personality, but this is a core way about how they go about life. It's very hard to get them to decouple that from, hey, you may care about that, but other people do not. And this is what I have learned from growing up in a rural place and then living in New York City. Very, very different environments, right? You start to see that people care about very different things, and they assume that the other person is is just like a bad person because they don't care about the same things. But the reality is they have different reasons for caring about those things that they do, and they don't actually see the other issues that the person in the city sees, and vice versa. So I think we do need to make a way forward. And I don't know how I'll find my clients because they're not going to be called clean tech companies anymore. I'll have to go just like look up efficiency or something like that, and we'll figure it out. But last thing I'd like to kind of close off with, since we're basically out of time now, is, are there any like big announcements or things that you guys are really excited for in the near future? Anything that's happened recently?
Yeah, I think we've got a few big announcements coming up. One that's very exciting that I think in a lot of ways is a game changer is our global partnership with Weatherford. So world-class company. We actually were trying to figure out which oilfield service company to work with. And we're just so impressed with the team and their capabilities and their ability to move quickly. So they're essentially going to be helping us deploy these projects in the field and providing us the advisory that we need to really scale up quickly. So yeah, that's one thing that I think, we're closing off 2025 very positively in that sense. We've got a few big, I think, announcements coming out in 2026 as well. And we're trying to sort of strategically drop those
you gotta drip them
Easter
out
eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
No, just for people who are not familiar, and I'm also not super familiar, what does Weatherford do, and what is the reason why that's a pretty significant thing for you guys?
So Weatherford, they're an oilfield services company. They essentially provide all of the services for oil companies to help ensure production continues, whether it's through workovers, repairing wells. They're also in the drilling space, some aspects of the drilling space, also in aspects of the chemical space, et cetera. So we've got essentially an operating arm in Weatherford to help us get this in the ground. We focus on the R&D. We focus on different technologies that we're developing, and they can focus on actually getting it to the field, to operators, and increasing their recovery factors through the production of hydrogen. So that's really what they do. And that's how this relationship is, I think, mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that's really helpful because then you don't have to necessarily scale up an entire ops team, right? Which can be very challenging.
Yeah.
Not because it's hard to find the talent, but there's just so many people. They're all in different markets, and it's hard to build a recruiting machine around that. So I could see that being
Not
super
only
helpful.
that, only that, Silas, I think the safety aspect is super important, right? Like one of the things we haven't talked about is safety is our number one priority. And for an experienced team who is in the field, lives in and breathes the field, they're extremely safe. They've got an awesome safety record. And so for us, that's another important piece of having a world-class company partner with us on this. So
Yeah, and it will
yeah,
also help. I mean, this is the issue with startups, right? You always have to have this kind of, we're innovating, but we're also like, we know how to do what we're doing. And you have this kind of tension. But if you can bring in somebody that is clearly well known to the oil and gas
yeah,
industry as a partner, that gives you a bit of credibility to go with it. So all you have to do is take care of
definitely.
technology, and they'll handle the operation. Just like trying to hire a bad EPC firm or something. Just a terrible, terrible idea, you know?
Absolutely. And I think they did a tremendous amount of due diligence, right? This is a discussion that started in 2024. And, we finally got to the point where they were comfortable with it. And they moved very quickly upon deciding that this is a partnership that's worth it for us, and it's worth it for Eclipse. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, we're out of time now. This has been a real pleasure to have you guys on. I would love to have you on again in the future to talk about as things change. I would be curious,
absolutely.
probably a year or two from now, to see what the vibe is in the industry, and if there's new tailwinds or new headwinds. But I appreciate you coming on. Any last things you want to call out for people?
I think that's all. If you want to get in touch, we've got our LinkedIn, we've got our website, eclipseenergy.co, so .co, not .com. Feel free to get in touch. We've got a great team. We'll likely have some positions opening up over the next couple months, next couple quarters. So, Silas, that's a heads up to you as well.
I'll be in touch. Don't worry.
Pleasure is all ours, and really appreciate you having us on the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Prab. Appreciate it.
All right, my man. Take care.
All right, everybody. That's it for today. If you found value in this, please share this episode with at least one other person who would like it. This is really the best way. It's kind of the only way for the show to grow is through you sharing. And guess what? They make it easy. If you're on Substack listening or watching, you can just share it right there. You can restack it on your Substack. You can do all kinds of things. You can tweet it. You can put it on LinkedIn. DM some people. There's a million ways you can share, but please do it because it's the best way for us to grow, because people who are interested in these topics. So send it right to them. And then finally, quick shout out to our sponsors. Again, if you need help winning grant funding, reach out to our sponsor, Climate Finance Solutions. That's climatefinancesolutions.com. They're extremely good at what they do. And if you want to build a truly differentiated talent attraction system, one that'll give you an unfair advantage over your competition, reach out to me today to learn how my firm, Earth Search, can help you. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Clean Techies. We will see you next time.